one of the things that I think actually has made Iceberg so successful is how interoperable it's been.
Yes.
Like, we don't want to make a decision that means a certain engine cannot work with the format or has to do a full rewrite.
Welcome to It's About Data, episode 52. For this episode, we interviewed Russell Spitzer at Day-to-Day Texas about the past, present, and future of Apache Iceberg.
So, Russell, welcome. It's great to see you here at Day-to-Day Texas. Thanks for taking the time to record with us. And do you want to say a few words about yourself to the audience and kind of where you come from?
Well, thanks so much for having me on here. So I'm Russell Spitzer. I think my chief claim to fame right now is I'm one of the PMC members of the Apache Iceberg project. So it's an open table format. And I ended up in that position through a kind of unlikely series of distributed data decisions. I finished a PhD in bioinformatics, and I realized that I only wanted to do distributed systems at that point.
Nice.
And I got a job at DataStax, which some folks might know of, which is a Apache Cassandra shop. So I learned all about working with open source projects. And one of my key things I did there was work on the integration between Spark and Cassandra.
Wow. That's incredible.
So got really into distributed systems, really into distributed analytics. And at a certain point, I decided I was going to go try something new. I went to Apple and I applied to the Spark team, and they said, "Hey, have you thought about Iceberg?" And I said, "Never heard of it." And that was the first step towards me. We're doing what I am doing today.
No, so what year was that at Apple? Was that right when the Iceberg standard was getting going?
That would have been
is it a little further in?
2020. So
That's pretty early on.
I think we were. Man, without knowing, I'm gonna go back and probably say the wrong date, but I think we hadn't even done the 1.0 release of Apache Iceberg. It had
Sounds
been,
about right. Yeah.
It had been donated, and it was in use in a bunch of places within Apple, but not at the scale that we currently have.
Yeah, it's interesting, and just the whole trajectory of Iceberg, because of course Delta preceded it, but the thing is that Iceberg really was grounded in the community from the start, and but that's a whole separate topic. You gave a really interesting talk yesterday, which shared a lot of insight about the evolution of Iceberg and also the growing pains. I mean, frankly, there are always going to be growing pains. As a platform is evolving, and so can you talk to us about basically where you see the evolution going? What are some of the growing pains right now?
I mean, I think a lot of our growing pains are from, it's hard to say that 2020 was so long ago, but it was in terms of how we were actually building systems and where things were going. Like at the time, we had a lot of different priorities. Like we basically didn't consider any system that didn't already use Hive as like a good target for replacement initially, because we were like, that is our natural thing. So we were optimizing a lot of things for how Hadoop was set up. We were looking at HDFS as like one of our main object store, or not object stores, but block stores that we had to be compatible with. So you make a lot of decisions that fit that world. Which then as time goes on, you're like, well, people now look and they're like, well, it's obvious you wouldn't want to do things that way. And I'm like, well, at the time, we didn't really think that that having a file, smaller than 256 megabytes even made sense.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're working with essentially the practice of the technology of the time, and like sort of an example I just keep rolling out is basically I was at an AI conference in Seattle in 1987, like almost 40 years ago.
Is that considered the AI winter at that point still?
Yeah, well, it was very much the AI winter, and I remember that the piece that I wrote coming out of it was AI's out, expert systems are in, which for the time was appropriate. I would say the same thing for this. Our experience from the 2010s, the big data era, was like, it was HDFS.
I mean, it's real easy to look back and say like, oh, that was the wrong decision. I mean, I feel like no one even talks about blockchain anymore. When I feel like you couldn't throw a rock without someone talking about how they were going to blockchain everything. And the whole world was going to save everyone's problems.
Until we saw how computationally inefficient it was.
I mean, we do these things over and over, but I think the best projects, and this is what my talk is basically about, is looking to how do we keep adapting.
Right.
And
I'm interested in that so let's go back to the community discussion, because I think that has been a tension with Iceberg. I think you guys are evolving, but one of the complaints is that it's just been challenging to evolve it fast enough to a new set of use cases because there are a lot of stakeholders involved. So maybe you can address that.
I mean, it's hard because I definitely see people are really excited and really want to have specialized features and specialized things. And one of the things that I think actually has made Iceberg so successful is how interoperable it's been.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, we don't want to make a decision that means a certain engine cannot work with the format or has
Right.
to do a full rewrite. And as you guys are both aware, but maybe not all of our viewers are, like, Iceberg is written as a technical specification first. It's similar like an HTTP standard or something like that. We want to make sure that everyone is on board with the change we're going to make before we make it. Because otherwise, and this is my deep fear, is we end up with a format that only works with one particular engine.
Right.
And at that point, what's the point of using Iceberg anymore? Like, the key benefit here is that you put your data in Iceberg right now, and you choose everything else at your own discretion. You decide, am I going to use Trino? Am I going to use Spark? Am I going to use Snowflake? My employer, please use Snowflake.
Okay.
But all these systems will work with your data, and
Yeah,
you can swap out that component. And we want to ensure that that remains a key focus of the project.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
that makes sense. And it's the Lego bricks concept, right?
Yeah.
Now, I think another complaint is that this is almost a fear amongst vendors and data framework writers. Frameworks are afraid to write to Iceberg because they don't want to mess it up. So how do you address that? Make sure that they can develop code that will interoperate with the Iceberg spec and with all the other Iceberg users without botching something, corrupting the data.
I mean, I have a few different thoughts on how this should go in the future. I mean, one of the things that I think is really great right now is we're finally getting other language implementations in the Apache repository itself. So again, for those who aren't aware, we started out very Java focused. Like, everything is Java.
Yes.
There was a little bit of Scala, and that got erased kind of quickly. But it's pretty much the heart of the project has been Java for a long time. And what we've realized, and what we're actively supporting now, you'll see some of our biggest growing parts of the project right now are Iceberg Rust, High Iceberg, Iceberg Go, because we're realizing that there's a lot of other engines that are not in this Java ecosystem that don't want to work with it. And the Iceberg REST spec, which is another thing we added, is a great example, again, of how we wanted to decouple the APIs we wrote in Java from working with Iceberg, because we don't want people to have to say, well, I have to do things the Java way if I want to write to Iceberg. So I think that's where we're seeing a lot of hopefully developments that will make this a lot easier in the future for everyone to integrate more directly.
I want to take this from another angle, which is that this is obviously a multi-vendor where you're focusing on compatibility. But yet, on the other hand, and this is and I'm not saying like as if there's anything wrong with that. Virtually every almost every commercial vendor, I mean maybe not every one of them, is adding their own optimizations on top of that. I'm not going to ask about the rightness or wrongness or anything like that. I mean, like I don't. I mean, but the thing is that, in a way, is this kind of, are there parallels with SQL? Because of course SQL is a standard, but everybody has their own SQL. Do you see parallels with that, or will Iceberg be different?
I do see some parallels there, because so Iceberg, really defines this transaction semantics. It defines how the data is laid out.
Right.
But I feel like our query engines are still very different, and I think that's actually really good, because I feel like that differentiation is really helping people to figure out better ways to actually process data.
Right.
And the key thing for me, though, is I want the differentiation to stay there. I don't want it to be where you are using a specific flavor of Iceberg that only works with Snowflake, for example. So like that's a strong thing in my guidance working at Snowflake and in our work is we want to make sure the tables that you write are also readable by all these other engines. And honestly, as a user, obviously none of us are tied to one company for our whole lives, but as we go around, what I like to see most is that you can try something else with no cost. There's no ETL cost to see, how would this work if I just wanted to switch between Trino and Spark? What would my cost look like?
Exactly.
And with Iceberg, you can do that. And I do not want to lose that if at all
I have
possible.
to give you guys at Snowflake a lot of credit on that, because you guys were one of the first to really be proactive about this and be serious about making Iceberg a first-class citizen. And I remember writing this up, and a lot of people were saying like, "Oh, Snowflake is going to lose all those storage, all those storage revenue." I was saying like, with Snowflake and with any engine, not just Snowflake, it's the compute.
Well, yeah,
It's the
because I think they
computer's
just
stupid.
pass, as far as I know, reading all the documentation, I think you just pass through the costs. So
Yeah,
like,
exactly, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the business side of
No,
this,
but I
Right,
give you
right.
guys credit for like really hopping on this
Yeah,
very
yeah.
proactively.
I know. I mean, my pitch has always been when I talk about this internally is I'm like, there is a market of people who are not willing to enter into the walled
Sure.
garden that,
Right.
that is Snowflake.
Right.
I mean, it's great and a lot of people love it, but there's some vendors or some users who are like, we can't take that step. That's one step too far. We want to make sure we are able to try out other things, to get to other places. And again, I'm much credit to Snowflakes. They realize like, oh, we can start doing, cost comparisons on these technologies without a huge foot in the door. Like this becomes way easier if we can just say point our tools to your and look, we can do a demo.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's what I want everyone to be able to do because I think that actually pushes the whole field forward a lot faster than step one, move to my format, step two, then we'll run a POC, and then everything is different and people complain. But if everything is in the same format from the start, we can make very easy apples to apples. All your current pipelines, don't change any of that. Let's change the query engine and see what happens.
Right.
Yeah. Well, because that's always, I mean, frankly, the data industry has been very focused on vendor lock-ins since the 80s. That has been the business model. But vendor lock-in cuts both ways. Like, if you have a company that really focuses on vendor lock-in, they're also hard to get into, and it's harder to acquire customers that way because people are afraid.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping we're entering an era now where like that just we've gotten rid of that idea, and I do think that that's probably like one of the maybe missteps that Delta took originally is to start out as another closed source format.
Yes.
Well, and even frankly, when they open sourced it, it was kind of like, yes, the code is open, but it's not really an open community. And that's what I love, frankly, about the fact that Databricks is very focused on Iceberg now, which is great for interop between these vendors.
It's great.
And in many cases, people will want to use several different tools. Spark is good for certain things, SQL is good for other things.
Yeah. But anyway, in the few minutes we have left, give us some examples. You're a little technical here, get a little dweeby here, which is like, give us some example like what you were just describing yesterday in terms of some of the projects underway in the Iceberg project to basically clear up, let's say, some of the inefficiencies that are endemic to an open format.
Well, I think one of the ones that everyone mentions, and this is probably a good one to broach with everyone, is that Iceberg originally in the spec was absolute paths for everything. So it's a bunch of metadata layers that talk to each other, and we did absolute paths. And this is one of those things when I was starting on the project that I'm like, this is a great decision because we were dealing with all of these HDFS users. And for those of you who are aware, HDFS will let you basically define at client level how to resolve ambiguous paths. It will basically say, I'm using this as the default file system. So when I see a relative path, the client decides what goes in the prefix. And at the time, I think as a project, we weren't ambitious enough, or maybe we just did not think it was that much of a concern to put an Iceberg level construct describing how do you unrelativize paths. And because of that, we had a bunch of early users who would make tables, and they would work on one person's machine, and they would not work on another's because they had different Hadoop configuration files. And I think especially at that age of a project, you need to get as many users as you can. You got to meet them where they are, and when you have, I'm a strong believer that there are no real user errors. There are design issues in the way you've built your system. And if you have something that people keep running into over and over and over, that's not their fault, that's your fault because you did not design it in a way that has them avoid an obvious pitfall. I mean, I've got little kids now, so I constantly say you got to set up for success. If you leave the Sharpies out, you're gonna get Sharpie on the wall. That's your fault, that's not your kid's fault.
I think you better give Matt some advice there.
Don't leave your Sharpies out.
Gotcha. One final question, which is basically, what are the lessons that you folks as a project have learned from the Hadoop project? I'm not talking about technology, but just in terms of the way the project is being run.
So community-wise, that's something we are very, very strict about. And like one of the things we try to do, and this is one of the reasons that we don't move as fast, I think, as some people like, is we look for a universal consensus. We basically don't say like, this part of the project is your domain. You get to
Yeah.
decide what happens here,
Yeah.
and we're going to ignore
Yeah.
it. Instead, we're like, this is a holistic effort. We do not allow change to go through unless we get basically complete consensus amongst everyone who is on board. So that makes us move a little bit slower forward, but makes it so that there's no chance that we'll have two flavors of Hadoop that do very, very different things. So far, I mean, and again, knock on wood, this is what we're trying to do every day, is keep it so that the project moves forward in a single unified way, so that everyone can interoperate with it, and we can keep getting that benefit of your data is in one place, and everyone gets to use it, and you get to choose all the tools on top of that.
Right, gotcha.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I mean, I'm really looking forward to continuing to see the evolution and especially adoption of Iceberg more widely.
Yeah,
the adoption is the most exciting
We'd love
part.
to have you back in about another 6 months and basically tell us, are you repudiating everything?
Of course, I've changed my mind completely. We're going to split the project into 17 different flavors of Iceberg. No, that won't happen.
Not.
Yeah. Well, and in fact, we'd love to get you. Sorry, Alex. I'll just say it right here. We'd love to get you and Alex Merced on at the same time to sort of talk the future, talk shop and such.
Exactly.
So we'll see if we
Sounds
can set
good.
that up someday.
Russell, thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.